The message arrived on Earth like a thunderbolt. Every government leader, every news station, every person with a communication device received the same cold announcement. The Galactic Confederation demanded that Earth send a representative to face judgment for crimes against the Sacred Preservation Edict. Su Jin stood in the Earth Defense Council's emergency meeting room, watching the panic unfold around her. Generals shouted orders while politicians argued about what to do. She had been Earth's ambassador to the few alien contacts they had made, but nothing had prepared anyone for this. "What did we do wrong?" asked Director Kim, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We followed all the rules they gave us." Su Jin looked at the holographic display showing the 3 worlds humanity had been terraforming. New Seoul, New Busan, and New Daegu were beautiful now, with blue skies and green forests. Millions of humans had new homes there. The planets had been dead rocks when they found them. "They say we broke some ancient law," she said quietly. "Something about preserving dead worlds." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what this meant. The Galactic Confederation was old and powerful. They controlled thousands of star systems and had technologies that seemed like magic. If they wanted to punish humanity, there was little Earth could do to stop them. "You have to go," said Director Kim. "You know their languages. You understand their customs better than anyone." Su Jin nodded. She had studied every piece of information about the alien species that ruled the galaxy. The Valdris were tall and thin, with skin that glowed like moonlight. They claimed to be the oldest species in the galaxy. The Thektar looked like giant insects, but were brilliant scientists and engineers. There were 10 other major species on the Galactic Council, each more advanced than humanity. The journey to the courthouse took 3 weeks on the fastest ship Earth could build. Minho, her assistant, traveled with her. He was young and nervous, constantly checking their files and practicing what they would say. "Do you think they will listen to us?" he asked as they approached the massive space station where the trial would take place. Su Jin stared out the window at the incredible structure ahead of them. The courthouse was bigger than Earth's moon, made of some kind of crystal that sparkled with its own light. Ships from dozens of different species floated around it like tiny insects. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but we have to try." The docking process was handled by machines that communicated in languages neither human understood. Robot guides led them through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. The gravity felt heavy, making each step difficult. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. Other beings walked through the corridors. Some floated rather than walked. Others moved on legs that bent in impossible directions. A few looked almost human, but their eyes were too large, or their skin was the wrong color. All of them stared at the humans with expressions that seemed curious or amused. The courtroom was enormous. The ceiling disappeared into darkness high above. 12 massive seats formed a circle around a small platform in the center. Each seat was designed for a different type of alien body. Some had pools of liquid instead of solid surfaces. Others had complex arrangements of wires and tubes. Su Jin and Minho were directed to the platform in the center. The space felt tiny compared to the giant room around them. Lights focused on them from every direction, making it hard to see the judges when they entered. High Arbiter Valdris was the first to arrive. She floated rather than walked, her body seeming to glow with its own light. Her voice sounded like music when she spoke, but her words were cold. "The humans have arrived," she announced to the room. "How amusing that such young creatures think they deserve to stand in this ancient court." Judge Thektar scuttled in next, his 6 legs making clicking sounds on the crystal floor. His insect head turned to examine the humans with compound eyes that reflected the light like mirrors. "Small," he said in a voice that buzzed like machinery. "Weak. Short-lived. Why do we waste time with creatures that barely lived long enough to leave their own planet?" One by one, the other judges took their seats. Judge Korveth looked like a giant lizard covered in scales that changed color. Arbiter Zelanik had tentacles instead of arms, and communicated through patterns of light that flashed across her skin. Each species was stranger than the last, and all of them looked at the humans like they were examining insects. When all 12 judges were seated, High Arbiter Valdris began to speak. Her voice filled the enormous room without any visible effort. "Humans of the planet Earth," she said, You stand accused of violating the Sacred Preservation Edict, a law that has protected the galaxy for 50,000 years. You have illegally terraformed 3 protected worlds, destroying their natural state and contaminating them with your presence. Sujin felt Minho trembling beside her. She kept her own face calm, even though her heart was beating fast. The evidence against you is clear, continued the High Arbiter. The worlds you call New Seoul, New Busan, and New Daegu were designated as preserved sites. Their ecosystems, however damaged, were to remain untouched for all time. You have broken this law willfully and without permission. Judge Thektar leaned forward, his insect head tilting in a way that seemed threatening. The penalty for this crime has always been the same: complete isolation. Your species will be confined to your birth system for 1,000 of your years. No trade, no travel, no contact with civilized species. Murmurs of agreement came from the other judges. Some made sounds that might have been laughter. Sujin realized they had already decided what would happen. This trial was just a formality. Your Honor, she said, stepping forward on the platform, I request permission to present our defense. The sound that came from the judges was definitely laughter this time. High Arbiter Valdris smiled, showing teeth that were too white and too sharp. Defense? She said. What defense could a species barely 10,000 years old possibly offer for breaking laws older than your entire civilization? Judge Korveth's scales shifted to a bright red color. Perhaps they will entertain us with stories of their primitive customs, he said. I have heard that young species often create amusing justifications for their ignorance. More laughter echoed through the chamber. Arbiter Zelanik's tentacles waved in patterns that the translation device said meant extreme amusement. The other judges made various sounds and gestures that all seemed to express the same idea. Humans were too young and stupid to be taken seriously. Very well, said High Arbiter Valdris finally. Speak your defense, little human. We will listen to your words before we pass judgment. Perhaps your primitive arguments will provide some entertainment before we conclude this matter. Sujin looked around the circle of alien faces. Some showed open contempt. Others seemed bored. A few looked like they were trying not to laugh. None of them showed any sign that they might actually listen to what she had to say. She thought about the millions of humans living on the 3 terraformed worlds. She thought about Earth, overcrowded and dying. She thought about all the work and hope that had gone into making new homes among the stars. Thank you, Your Honor, she said calmly. I will present humanity's case. The judges settled back in their seats, clearly expecting to be amused by whatever foolish arguments this primitive species might offer. They had no idea what Sujin was about to reveal or how much humanity had learned while they thought no one was watching. The trial was about to begin, but it would not go the way anyone in that ancient courtroom expected. Sujin activated the holographic projector that Minho had prepared. Images filled the air above the platform, showing Earth as it looked today. The planet was brown and gray where it should have been green and blue. Massive cities covered every continent, connected by highways that stretched from ocean to ocean. This is our home, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast courtroom. 12 billion humans live on Earth. Our oceans are dying. Our forests are gone. The air in our cities makes children sick. The images changed, showing crowded streets where people wore masks to breathe. Hospitals full of patients suffering from pollution-related diseases, farms that could barely grow enough food to feed the population. Judge Thektar made a clicking sound with his mandibles. Typical, he buzzed. Young species always destroy their birth worlds through ignorance and greed. That is not our fault alone, Sujin continued. When we first reached space, we asked for help. We requested permission to settle on empty worlds where we could build new homes without damaging existing ecosystems. New images appeared, showing the formal requests Earth had sent to the Galactic Confederation, page after page of carefully written applications asking for guidance on which worlds were safe to colonize. We received no response, Sujin said. For 20 years, we sent messages and received only silence. Meanwhile, our people continued to suffer. High Arbiter Valdris waved a glowing hand dismissively. The Confederation does not respond to every primitive species that discovers space travel. Most destroy themselves within a few centuries. Why waste time on creatures that will likely be extinct before they matter? Sujin felt anger rising in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. So we searched for worlds we could settle without harming anyone. We found 3 planets that our surveys showed were completely dead. The hologram changed again, showing the 3 worlds as humanity had first discovered them. They were gray, lifeless rocks orbiting a distant star. The atmosphere readings showed toxic gases. The surface was covered in ancient craters and the remains of what might have been cities billions of years ago. These worlds had no plants, no animals, no life of any kind, Sujin explained. Our scientists spent 5 years studying them. They found evidence that any ecosystems that might have existed were destroyed long ago by war or cosmic disasters. The images showed human survey teams in protective suits taking samples from dead soil. Radiation readings indicated that something terrible had happened to these planets long before humans ever left Earth. We terraformed these worlds carefully, Sujin continued. We brought our own plants and animals from Earth. We created new ecosystems that had never existed on those planets before. We gave life to worlds that had been dead for millions of years. Judge Corveth's scales shifted to a bright orange color that the translator said indicated annoyance. The law is clear, he said. Those worlds were designated as preserve sites. It does not matter if they were dead. It does not matter if you thought you were helping. You broke the law. But why? Sujin asked. Why preserve dead rocks? Why protect worlds that have no life to protect? The question seemed to surprise some of the judges. Arbiter Zelanic's tentacles writhed in what the translator called confusion. A few other judges made sounds that indicated they had never considered this question before. High Arbiter Valdris leaned forward, her glowing eyes focusing on Sujin with new intensity. The law is 50,000 years old, she said. It was created by species far wiser than yours. We do not question the wisdom of our ancestors. Even when that wisdom no longer makes sense? Sujin asked. The courtroom erupted in angry sounds from all 12 judges. Judge Thektar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Several judges rose from their seats, their various appendages waving in gestures that clearly indicated outrage. "Silence!" roared High Arbiter Valdris, her musical voice becoming harsh and commanding. "You dare to question laws that kept peace in this galaxy since before your species existed?" Sujin stood her ground, even though every instinct told her to step back. "I question laws that prevent life from flourishing," she said. "I question laws that condemn billions of people to suffering while dead worlds sit empty and unused." Judge Corveth's scales turned deep red. "Your suffering is irrelevant," he said. "Your species is young and ignorant. If you cannot solve your problems without breaking galactic law, then perhaps you deserve extinction." The words hit Sujin like a physical blow. Around the circle of judges, she saw agreement in alien faces. These beings, who claimed to be civilized and wise, were completely indifferent to human suffering. "Show them the children," she said quietly to Minho. New images appeared in the hologram. Human children playing in parks on New Sol. Families building homes on New Busan. Scientists working in laboratories on New Daegu, developing new technologies that could help solve Earth's problems. 3 million humans live on those worlds. Now, Sujin said, children who can breathe clean air for the first time in generations. Families who can grow their own food. Scientists who have space to work on solutions for our dying planet. The images showed happy faces, healthy children, thriving communities. The contrast with the earlier images of Earth was striking. "What you call a crime, we call hope," Sujin said. "We gave life to dead worlds and homes to dying people." Judge Thektar made a dismissive buzzing sound. "Emotional manipulation," he said. "Typical behavior from primitive species. Show us pictures of your offspring and expect us to ignore your crimes." "They are not criminals," Sujin said, her voice rising slightly. "They are people trying to survive in a galaxy that apparently values dead rocks more than living beings." High Arbiter Valdris stood up from her floating seat, her entire body glowing brighter with anger. "Enough," she said. We have heard your pathetic justifications. The law is absolute. It does not bend for convenience or sentiment. The law says, those worlds must be preserved, Sujin said. But preserved for what? For whom? They were dead when we found them. They will be dead again if you make us leave. That is not our concern, said Arbiter Zelanik, her tentacles forming patterns that indicated finality. Our concern is maintaining order and respect for ancient wisdom. Sujin looked around the circle of alien judges. She saw no sympathy, no understanding, no willingness to consider that their ancient laws might be wrong. They had made up their minds before she ever spoke. Is that your final decision? She asked. You will condemn 3 million innocent people and force them back to a dying world, all to preserve empty space? High Arbiter Valdris smiled, showing those sharp white teeth again. Young species always think their immediate needs are more important than eternal principles, she said. This is why they remain young, and why they rarely survive long enough to learn wisdom. The other judges made sounds of agreement. Some seemed amused by Sujin's distress. Others appeared bored, as if they had already moved on to more interesting matters. The evidence has been presented, announced High Arbiter Valdris. The law is clear. Humanity has violated the Sacred Preservation Edict. The penalty is isolation for 1,000 years. Sujin felt Minho's hand touch her arm gently. He was trying to offer comfort, but she could see in his face that he had given up hope. Around them, the ancient court prepared to deliver its judgment on humanity's future. But Sujin was not finished yet. She had one more card to play, one more argument to make. She just had to wait for the right moment to use it. As Sujin tried to continue her argument, the atmosphere in the courtroom changed completely. What had been cold indifference became open mockery. Judge Korveth was the first to laugh, a harsh sound that made his throat scales rattle. Listen to this creature, he said, his voice dripping with amusement. She speaks of justice as if her young species understands the meaning of the word. High Arbiter Valdris joined in the laughter, her musical voice turning cruel. 50,000 years of galactic peace, and this infant civilization thinks it knows better than ancient wisdom. The other judges began making their own sounds of amusement. Judge Thektar's mandibles clicked in rapid patterns that indicated extreme hilarity. Arbiter Zelanik's tentacles writhed in what the translator called dismissive entertainment. Each alien species had its own way of showing contempt, and all of them were using it now. Your Honor, Sujin said, trying to regain control of the proceeding. If you would allow me to finish my presentation, interrupted Judge Korveth, his scales shifting to bright yellow with mirth. You call that rambling collection of excuses a presentation? I have seen hatchlings give more convincing arguments for stealing food. The comparison drew fresh laughter from around the circle. Sujin felt her face burning with embarrassment and anger, but she forced herself to remain calm. Judge Thektar leaned forward, his compound eyes reflecting the light in patterns that hurt to look at. Tell me, little human, he buzzed, how long has your species existed in its current form? Approximately 200,000 years, Sujin answered, though she suspected this was some kind of trap. The buzzing sound that came from Judge Thektar was definitely laughter. 200,000, he repeated. My species has maintained detailed records for over 10 million years. Some of my personal memories date back 4,000 years. He gestured with one of his segmented arms toward High Arbiter Valdris. The honored Arbiter's people were building star-spanning civilizations when your ancestors were still learning to use fire, and you think your brief experience gives you wisdom to challenge our laws? High Arbiter Valdris nodded gracefully. The Valdris have guided galactic civilization for 30 million years, she said. We have seen thousands of young species like yours. Most follow a predictable pattern. First, they destroy their birth world through ignorance. Then they blame others for their problems. Finally, they demand special treatment because their situation is supposedly unique. But it is unique, Sujin protested. Those worlds were dead. Nothing about your situation is unique, interrupted Arbiter Zelanik, her tentacles forming patterns that pulsed with contempt. The Korthani said the same thing 12,000 years ago when they tried to colonize the Forbidden Zones. The Vexillum made identical arguments 6,000 years ago. Judge Korveth's scales turned a deep orange color. At least the Korthani had the dignity to accept their punishment quietly, he said. They did not whine and make excuses like spoiled children. What happened to them? Minho asked quietly from beside Sujin. It was the first time he had spoken since entering the courtroom. The silence that followed his question was somehow worse than the laughter had been. Judge Thektar's mandibles clicked slowly, a sound the translator indicated meant dark satisfaction. The Korthani no longer exist, he said simply. Nor do the Vexillum, nor do any of the 17 other species that chose to challenge galactic law rather than accept their punishments. The meaning was clear, and it sent a chill through both humans. Sujin looked around the circle of alien faces and saw no sympathy, no regret, no sign that these beings cared at all about the destruction of entire civilizations. High Arbiter Valdris seemed to enjoy their shock. "Oh, we did not destroy them directly," she said, her voice taking on a tone of false sympathy. "We simply withdrew our protection. Young species face so many dangers in the galaxy. Pirates, natural disasters, resource conflicts. Without the guidance and protection of the Confederation, they rarely survive long." "That's murder," Sujin said, her voice barely a whisper. The laughter that erupted from the judges was louder than before. Judge Korveth actually stood up from his seat, his whole body shaking with mirth. "Murder?" he gasped between laughs. "Did you hear that? The primitive creature thinks we murdered the other species." Arbiter Zalanik's tentacles twisted into complex knots that indicated overwhelming amusement. "How can you murder beings that were too weak to survive on their own?" she asked. "We simply stopped helping them. Natural selection did the rest." Judge Thektar's clicking had become so rapid it sounded like machinery. "Perhaps," he said through his laughter, "we should add charges of mental deficiency to their crimes. Clearly this species lacks the intelligence to understand basic concepts, the A." Mockery continued for several minutes. The judges shared stories of other young species they had encountered, each tale more dismissive than the last. They described civilizations that had begged for mercy, leaders who had offered their planet's entire wealth in exchange for forgiveness, species that had literally prostrated themselves before the court. The Zorathi actually brought their offspring. "To court," said one judge, whose voice sounded like grinding stone. "They thought we would be moved by the sight of their young ones. Instead, we were disgusted by such obvious emotional manipulation. At least the Zorathi understood their place," added another. "They accepted their isolation without this tedious arguing about justice and fairness." High Arbiter Valdris raised a glowing hand for silence. "Enough reminiscence," she said. "We have wasted sufficient time on this matter. The human representative has presented her case, such as it was. Now we must vote on the appropriate punishment." "Punishment?" Sujin asked. "I thought you said the penalty was isolation." Judge Korveth's scales shifted to a dark red color that the translator warned indicated dangerous mood. "Isolation is the minimum penalty," he said. "But your species has shown particular arrogance in challenging our authority. Perhaps a stronger lesson is needed." "What are you suggesting?" High Arbiter Valdris asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and approved. "Complete quarantine," Judge Korveth said. "Not just prevention of space travel, but active containment. Barrier fields around your entire system. Let humanity solve its overpopulation problem without any possibility of expansion." The suggestion was met with approving sounds from several other judges. Sujin felt her heart sinking as she realized they were seriously considering condemning her entire species to death by starvation and resource depletion. "Surely that's excessive," she said desperately. "We're talking about the deaths of billions of innocent people." Judge Thektar's compound eyes fixed on her with what seemed like genuine puzzlement. "Innocent," he buzzed. "Your entire species is guilty of lawbreaking. In what way are any of you innocent?" "The children," Sujin began. "Will learn proper respect for galactic authority," interrupted Arbiter Zalanik. "Assuming any survive long enough to reach maturity." The casual way she spoke of humanity's extinction made Sujin's blood run cold. These beings were discussing genocide as if they were planning a meal. "I believe we have heard enough," announced High Arbiter Valdris. "Unless the human representative has something new to add, we will proceed to vote." Sujin looked around the circle of alien faces one more time. She saw contempt, amusement, and complete indifference to human suffering. These beings had already decided that humanity deserved to die for the crime of trying to survive. "Actually," she said quietly, "I do have something new to add." The judges paused in their preparation to vote, some looking annoyed at the delay. High Arbiter Valdris sighed with exaggerated patience. "Very well," she said. "Speak quickly. We have more important matters to attend to today." Sujin looked at Minho, who nodded slightly. He activated a new program on their holographic projector, one they had hoped never to use. "Thank you, Your Honor," Sujin said calmly. "I promise this will be worth your time." Sujin stood quietly in the center of the platform as the judges prepared to vote on humanity's fate. The holographic projector hummed softly beside her, ready to display whatever Minho had prepared. The judges barely looked at her, treating her final statement as an annoying delay before they could return to more important matters. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm and clear, "before you vote, I think you should know what humanity has learned about this court during our time in space." High Arbiter Valdris waved a dismissive hand. "We care nothing for your primitive observations," she said. "Proceed quickly so we may finish this matter." Sujin nodded and activated the projector. Instead of showing images of Earth or the terraformed worlds, the hologram displayed what looked like a star chart. Dozens of solar systems were marked with different colored lights. "This is interesting," she said, pointing to a cluster of red dots. "These are mining operations in the Corveth sector. According to our information, 17 of these are located on worlds that were supposed to be protected under the same preservation. Edict you're using to punish us." Judge Corveth's scales suddenly shifted from red to pale gray. The color change was so dramatic that several other judges noticed and turned to look at him. "That is impossible," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Those operations were approved by whom?" Sujin asked gently. "The records show no such approvals. In fact, the records show that these mining operations have been extracting rare metals from protected worlds for over 300 years. The courtroom had become very quiet. Judge Corveth was making soft hissing sounds, his scales cycling, through colors that the translator said indicated extreme distress. Sujin turned to another section of the star chart. "And here we have something even more interesting. Arbiter Zelanik, your research facilities on the Nexus worlds are quite impressive." Arbiter Zelanik's tentacles suddenly went rigid, a reaction that looked painful. "How do you know about—" she started, then stopped herself. "About your genetic experiments?" Sujin finished. "The ones involving sentient species without their consent? Our records show that you've been conducting illegal research on captured beings from at least 12 different civilizations." The hologram zoomed in on one particular world, showing what looked like a massive research complex. Data streams flowed past, displaying experiment logs and test results that made Minho look sick just reading them. "This is impossible," Judge Thektar buzzed, his voice much higher than before. "How could your primitive species have access to classified information?" Sujin smiled for the first time since entering the courtroom. "Judge Thektar, that's an excellent question, especially considering your own activities. Tell me, how long have you been involved in the slave trade?" The clicking sound that came from Judge Thektar was unlike anything the translator had heard before. It took several seconds to provide a translation. "Extreme alarm and fear. The Confederation banned slavery 2,000 years ago," Sujin continued. "Yet our records show regular shipments of captured beings from primitive worlds to your personal facilities. Workers who never return home. Families torn apart to provide labor for your projects." More data flowed across the hologram. Shipping manifests, payment records, communications between slave traders and their customers. Judge Thektar's name appeared again and again in the records. High Arbiter Valdris rose from her floating seat, her body glowing brighter with anger. "Enough of this," she said. "I do not know how you obtained this false information, but—" "False?" Sujin interrupted. "Shall we discuss your own activities, High Arbiter? The secret weapons development on forbidden worlds? The deliberate suppression of younger species to maintain your power?" The hologram shifted again, showing a world that looked burned and scarred. This is Kepler 442b, Sujin said. According to your own records, it was destroyed in a natural disaster. But our data shows it was actually a testing site for planet-killing weapons. Weapons that you used to eliminate the Korthani and Vexillum when they became too troublesome. The silence in the courtroom was complete now. Every judge was staring at the hologram in shock and growing fear. The data was too detailed, too accurate to be false. Someone had been watching them very carefully. How? Whispered High Arbiter Valdris. How is this possible? Sujin looked around the circle of alien faces. Where before she had seen contempt and amusement, now she saw fear and confusion. The powerful beings who had been mocking humanity minutes ago were now terrified of what a primitive species had discovered. You've been watching us since we left Earth, she said, monitoring our communications, tracking our ships, studying our behavior. You thought we were too young and ignorant to notice. She gestured to the hologram, which now showed a complex network of communication intercepts and surveillance data. But we've been watching you too. Every transmission, every secret meeting, every illegal operation. Humanity may be young, but we're very good at gathering information. Judge Korveth tried to speak, but only managed a weak hissing sound. His scales were now almost white, a color the translator said indicated complete terror. The 3 worlds we terraformed, Sujin continued. They weren't protected preserve sites. They were testing grounds for your illegal weapons research. You destroyed their ecosystems yourselves thousands of years ago, then declared them protected to hide the evidence of what you'd done. The hologram showed the true history of the 3 worlds. Ancient records of weapons tests, environmental destruction, and cover-ups. The Sacred Preservation Edict wasn't about protecting nature at all. It was about hiding the Confederation's own crimes. This is treason. Judge Thektar managed to buzz, though his voice was barely audible. You cannot accuse the Confederation of what? Sujin asked. Of exactly the crimes you're punishing us for? Of breaking your own laws while demanding that others follow them? She looked directly at High Arbiter Valdris. 12 species have been completely destroyed because they challenged you. Not because they were weak or couldn't survive on their own, but because you murdered them to protect your secrets. The evidence was overwhelming. Communication intercepts showing orders for assassinations. Financial records proving corruption and bribery. Video footage of illegal weapons being used against helpless planets. Everything the Confederation had done in secret for thousands of years was laid bare. Where did you get this information? High Arbiter Valdris demanded, her musical voice now harsh with panic. Sujin smiled again. From your own networks, she said. Every time you sent a transmission, every time you recorded a conversation, every time you filed a report. We've been copying everything for the past 50 years. That's impossible, Arbiter Zalonix said, her tentacles writhing in distress. Our encryption is unbreakable. Our security is perfect. Your encryption is very good, Sujin agreed. It took us 30 years to crack it. But once we did, we had access to everything. Every secret, every lie, every crime you've committed in the name of galactic peace. The judges were looking at each other now, their various forms of communication, creating a chaos of sounds and lights. Some were clearly trying to figure out how to escape. Others seemed to be planning how to silence the humans before this information could spread. But Sujin wasn't finished yet. She had saved the most important revelation for last. There's just one more thing you should know, she said quietly. Phew. Judges froze, waiting for whatever final blow she was about to deliver. This entire trial is being broadcast live to every civilized world in the galaxy. The words hit the courtroom like a physical explosion. For a moment, complete silence filled the vast space. Then chaos erupted as the judges realized what Sujin had just told them. Impossible! Shrieked High Arbiter Valdris, her glowing form, flickering like a broken light. This court's proceedings are classified. The transmission barriers were bypassed 3 hours ago, Sujin said calmly. Right now, billions of beings across the galaxy are watching this trial. They're seeing the evidence of your crimes. They're hearing your confessions. Judge Korveth leaped from his seat, his scales flashing through colors so rapidly they hurt to look at. Shut down the transmission, he roared. Security, stop this immediately. But nothing happened. The holographic display continued showing the evidence of Confederation crimes. The courtroom's own broadcasting system was being used against them, and they couldn't regain control. Judge Thektar's mandibles clicked frantically as he worked on some kind of communication device. The security systems aren't responding. He buzzed in panic. Someone has locked us out of our own network. Sujin watched their panic with calm satisfaction. While you were laughing at humanity's primitive technology, she said, we were learning from you. Every system you used to spy on us, we studied and improved. Your own surveillance network is now under our control. The hologram shifted to show a new image. Thousands of alien worlds, each with communication centers that were broadcasting the trial. The signal was being relayed through the Confederation's own networks, making it impossible to stop without shutting down galactic communications entirely. You cannot do this, Arbiter Zelanik wailed, her tentacles knotting themselves in distress. The chaos this will cause, civilizations will fall. Civilizations built on lies deserve to fall, Sujin replied. The truth has a way of setting people free. High Arbiter Valdris tried to regain control of the situation. Even if this broadcast is real, she said, her voice shaking, no one will believe accusations from a primitive species. The Confederation has maintained order for millions of years. The Confederation has maintained power through fear and deception, Sujin interrupted. But we're not just showing them our accusations, we're showing them your own records. The hologram displayed a new set of documents, secret agreements between Confederation members to divide up the resources of conquered worlds, plans to deliberately keep younger species weak and dependent, orders to eliminate any civilization that might become a threat to their power. These are your own words, Sujin said. Your own signatures on death warrants for entire species. Your own voices ordering the destruction of worlds that dared to ask for freedom. Judge Korveth was now pacing back and forth, his claws scratching the crystal floor. The younger species won't understand, he said desperately. They lack the wisdom to interpret these documents correctly. They'll misunderstand our intentions. Will they? Sujin asked. Let's see what they think. The hologram changed again, showing incoming messages from across the galaxy. Thousands of communications were pouring in as the broadcast reached different worlds. From the Altarian Republic, Sujin read, we demand immediate independence from Confederation oversight. She moved to another message. From the Proxima Alliance, we formally reject all Confederation authority and declare our sovereignty. More. Messages appeared faster than she could read them. Species after species was announcing their intention to break free from Confederation control. Some were demanding justice for past crimes. Others were simply declaring independence and cutting all ties. Stop, screamed High Arbiter Valdris. You don't understand what you're doing. Without the Confederation, the galaxy will descend into chaos. The galaxy has been in chaos, Sujin said. You just hit it well. Species living in fear. Entire civilizations destroyed for asking questions, resources stolen to maintain your power. What you call order, the rest of us call oppression. Judge Thektar had stopped trying to work on his communication device. His compound eyes reflected the light from the hologram as he watched message after message, declaring independence from his people's rule. 30 million years, he whispered. 30 million years of civilization destroyed by primitives who've been in space for less than a century. Not destroyed, Sujin corrected. Transformed. Civilization doesn't require tyrants. It just requires people willing to work together honestly. The evidence continued flowing across the hologram. Financial records showing how the Confederation had stolen resources from smaller species. Military reports describing the deliberate weakening of potential rivals. Scientific data proving that many natural disasters had actually been weapons tests. You want to know the real crime? Sujin asked, her voice rising with anger. It's not that we terraformed 3 dead worlds. It's that you had the technology to save our dying planet 50 years ago. But you chose to let us suffer. You wanted us weak and desperate, so we'd be easier to control. This revelation seemed to shock even the other judges. Several turned to stare at High Arbiter Valdris, who had gone very still. The atmospheric processors, Judge Korveth said slowly. You said they weren't suitable for primitive worlds. They would have worked perfectly on Earth, High Arbiter Valdris admitted, her voice barely audible. But healthy, thriving humans would have been harder to manipulate. The admission sent new waves of outrage across the galaxy. The incoming messages became even more aggressive, with several species threatening military action against Confederation forces. "So you condemned billions to die just to maintain your power," Sujin said. "You could have helped us, but you chose to watch us suffer instead." She looked around the circle of judges, seeing fear and desperation, where minutes ago there had been arrogance and contempt. "That's the difference between us. When we found dead worlds, we brought them back to life. When you found dying species, you let them suffer." More evidence appeared on the hologram. Secret recordings of Confederation meetings where they discussed which species to help and which to abandon. Detailed plans for managing galactic populations to prevent any single group from becoming too powerful. "The Urathi Plague," Sujin read from one document. "Recommended response: allow natural progression to reduce population to manageable levels." She looked up at the judges. "You had the cure. You let them die anyway because there were too many of them." The messages from across the galaxy were becoming more coordinated now. Species were forming alliances, sharing information, planning joint responses to Confederation crimes. What had started as individual declarations of independence was becoming a galaxy-wide revolution. "You have destroyed everything," Arbiter Zelanik moaned, her tentacles hanging limp with despair. "Millions of years of order, gone." "No," Sujin said firmly. "We've revealed the truth. The galaxy is choosing freedom over oppression, knowledge over ignorance, cooperation over domination. That's not destruction. That's evolution. High Arbiter." Valdris made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "Security forces are en route," she announced. "This broadcast will be stopped, and you will be executed for treason against the Galactic Order." Sujin smiled. "You might want to check on those security forces." The hologram shifted to show space around the courthouse. Where there should have been Confederation patrol ships, they saw vessels from dozens of different species. Ships that had been part of the Confederation fleet were now broadcasting independent signals and joining the rebellion. "Your own people are abandoning you," Sujin observed. "Even your military forces are choosing freedom over loyalty to corrupt leaders." The revolution was spreading faster than anyone could have imagined. The truth about Confederation crimes was racing across the galaxy at light speed, carried by the very networks the tyrants had built to maintain their power. But Sujin wasn't finished yet. She had one final message to deliver, and it would change everything. The chaos in the courtroom reached its peak as more and more species declared independence. Judge Korveth was frantically trying to contact Confederation military forces, but ship after ship was switching sides. Judge Thektar had curled into a defensive position, his compound eyes reflecting the light of rebellion spreading across the galaxy. High Arbiter Valdris stood at the center of it all, her glowing form flickering as her power systems struggled to maintain her composure. "This ends now," she declared, her musical voice turning harsh and commanding. "Emergency powers are hereby invoked. All rebellious species will be destroyed, starting with the humans." She raised her hands and energy began building around her. Valdris technology was among the most advanced in the galaxy, and she was preparing to use it as a weapon. The air in the courtroom crackled with dangerous power. "You think you've won," she said to Sujin, "but you've only ensured the destruction of everything you claim to protect. Without Confederation oversight, the galaxy will tear itself apart in wars and chaos." Sujin stood calmly in the face of the building energy storm. Minho stepped closer to her, ready to face whatever came next. Around them, the other judges were either cowering in fear or preparing their own weapons. "You're right about one thing," Sujin said quietly. "This does end now." She activated one final program on the holographic projector. The display changed to show something that made every judge in the room freeze in shock. Real-time tactical displays of the space around the courthouse. "You see," Sujin continued, "while you were busy laughing at primitive humans, we weren't just gathering intelligence. We were also sharing it. Every piece of evidence we collected, every crime we uncovered, every technology we developed, we gave it all away." The tactical display showed the approaching fleets in detail, ships from hundreds of different species, all converging on the courthouse. But these weren't just rebel ships that had abandoned the Confederation. These were vessels equipped with technology that shouldn't exist. Impossible, whispered Judge Thektar. Those are Confederation-level weapons systems. How could primitive species— Because they're not primitive anymore, Sujin said. For the past 20 years, humanity has been secretly sharing our advances with every oppressed species in the galaxy. Medical technology, defensive systems, communications equipment, everything we learned from studying your networks. The hologram zoomed in on specific ships, showing weapons and defenses that matched or exceeded Confederation standards. Species that had been kept deliberately weak now possessed the tools to defend themselves. The Altarians always had the intelligence to build advanced ships, Sujin explained. They just lacked the technical specifications. The Centauri had the resources for planetary defense shields, but not the engineering knowledge. The Proxima colonies could have developed faster-than-light communications decades ago if they'd known the principles involved. High Arbiter Valdris lowered her hands, the energy around her dissipating as she realized the magnitude of what humanity had done. "You gave them weapons," she said in disbelief. "We gave them knowledge," Sujin corrected. "Knowledge that you kept from them to maintain your power. The weapons they built with that knowledge are their own achievement." Judge Corveth's scales had turned a sickly yellow color. "But the balance of power, the stability we maintained, was built on keeping billions of beings ignorant and helpless," Sujin said. "Real stability comes from cooperation between equals, not domination by tyrants." The tactical display showed more ships arriving every minute. The rebellion was becoming an unstoppable force as species after species joined the fight for freedom. More importantly, they were coordinating their efforts, sharing resources and information in ways the Confederation had never allowed. "You don't understand," Arbiter Zelanik said desperately. "Without central authority, they'll fight each other. Different species have different needs, different goals. War is inevitable." "Maybe," Sujin agreed, "but that will be their choice to make. Freedom includes the right to make mistakes and learn from them. What it doesn't include is the right to be enslaved for your own protection." High Arbiter Valdris tried one last time to assert her authority. "The Confederation fleets will destroy these rebels," she declared. "We have controlled the galaxy for millions of years. We will not be overthrown by children and primitives." Sujin smiled sadly. "Your fleets are joining the rebels," she said. "Even your own people are tired of the lies and corruption. Look at your tactical displays." The hologram showed the truth of her words. Confederation warships across the galaxy were broadcasting independent signals. Crews were mutinying against their officers. Entire fleets were switching sides without firing a shot. 30 million years of civilization, Judge Thektar moaned. All ending because we underestimated a species that learned to use fire yesterday. "Not ending," Sujin said firmly. "Beginning. Real civilization doesn't require rulers and subjects. It requires partners working together toward common goals." The messages from across the galaxy were now coming in too fast to read. Species were forming alliances based on mutual benefit rather than fear. They were sharing technology, resources, and knowledge freely. What had been a rigid hierarchy was becoming a dynamic network of cooperation. But the chaos, High Arbiter, Valdris insisted. The wars, the suffering, the collapse of order will be temporary, Sujin said. Growing pains as the galaxy learns to govern itself. Yes, there will be conflicts. Yes, some species will make bad decisions. But they'll be free to learn from their mistakes and do better next time. She looked around the circle of defeated judges. That's what you never understood. You thought wisdom came from age and power. But real wisdom comes from freedom to experiment, to fail and to try again. The courthouse shook as the first of the rebel ships reached weapons range. The crystal structure groaned under the stress of opposing force fields and energy weapons, but there was no battle. The Confederation ships that should have been defending the courthouse were instead joining the attackers. "What happens to us?" Judge Corveth asked quietly, his scales now a pale gray that indicated resignation. Sujin considered the question carefully. "That's not for me to decide," she said finally. "Each species you've oppressed will have to choose how to handle justice. Some may forgive. Others may demand punishment, but it will be their choice, not yours." High Arbiter Valdris laughed bitterly. "You think this is justice? Mob rule replacing lawful authority?" "I think this is democracy," Sujin replied. "Messy, imperfect, sometimes unfair democracy, but it's better than tyranny disguised as order. The courtroom was shaking more violently now as rebel forces surrounded the courthouse. Emergency lights were flashing, and automated systems were announcing the approach of multiple hostile fleets. Sujin walked to the edge of the platform and looked up at the judges one last time. "You laughed at our plea for justice," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chaos. "You thought we were just another primitive species begging for mercy." She paused, letting her words echo in the vast chamber. "But we weren't pleading with you. We were offering you one last chance to do the right thing, a chance to show that your ancient wisdom could adapt to new circumstances, a chance to prove that your power was based on justice rather than fear." The judges sat in stunned silence, finally understanding what they had missed. "That chance has now passed," Sujin said quietly. She activated the holographic projector one final time. The display showed a simple message being broadcast to every world in the galaxy. The Galactic Confederation is hereby dissolved. All species are declared free and sovereign. A new alliance based on cooperation and mutual respect will be formed by any who choose to participate. The age of tyranny is over. The age of freedom has begun. The message was signed by representatives of over 3,000 species, with more adding their names every second. The revolution was complete, and there was no going back. As the courthouse began to surrender to the rebel forces, Sujin and Minho prepared to leave. They had work to do, a new galactic government to help organize, relationships to build, between former enemies, and a future to create based on cooperation rather than domination. Behind them, the ancient judges sat in their massive seats, rulers of nothing, masters of no one. Their millions of years of power had ended not with conquest or war, but with the simple revelation of truth. The galaxy was free, and humanity had kept its promise to give life to dead worlds, not just the 3 planets they had terraformed, but the entire galactic civilization that had been suffocating under tyranny. The final words had been spoken, and the universe would never be the same.